I want to thank everyone for coming today. My name is Tim Waite with the Simpson Strong Tie Company. I'd like to thank Contractors Association of Kauai for inviting me to talk a little bit today about hurricane strengthening options for your home. I'd just like to go through some of the information that we've gathered and put together to try and make everyone's home a little bit stronger. In the recent years, we've had a lot of occurrences. Hurricane Iselle in 2014. These were the different tracks that were projected for Hurricane Iselle. Of course, as we know, it came close to Hilo and then kind of fizzled out, but you could see that it had a high probability of hitting somewhere in the state, if not all of the islands. Tropical Storm Anna, also in 2014, was in the vicinity and came really close. In 2015, we had a very active hurricane season, and we had a record number of tropical cyclones. You can see the paths here of all the different storms that came within our region in the state. Here in 2015, we had 3 Category 4 hurricanes all happening at the same time, all surrounding the state. So a lot of people ask, if we're going to have a hurricane in the near future. The question is not if, but when. And so that's the purpose of the presentation today, is just being prepared and trying to protect our families a little bit more. 2016, just last year, Madeline and Lester were approaching our island chain. So it's very serious. If we take a look at Galveston Island after Hurricane Ike, there was 1 house left in this vicinity, in this region, and all the other houses in that particular area were destroyed, or in other words, wiped off the map. And so that's the only difference is this house had been recently renovated and it had been built to code. And so it had the necessary load path or clips and ties in there. And that's just a few $100s worth of material that goes into a house that can make the difference of being there tomorrow. And then what happens afterwards? Everyone thinks the government's going to be coming running to our aid. This is a picture after the tsunami event in American Samoa. And this happened several years ago, and people are still living in what's known as the FEMA tents, as shown in this slide. And it's not very comfortable living, and it takes a long time before someone comes to help. So I was talking to a gentleman earlier out on the show floor who's from Florida, and he said when they harden their homes, and then they leave. And they go somewhere, they get in the car and they drive away. So the question in Hawaii is, where are we going to go? We're not really going to be driving away. We need to either shelter in place or know where the emergency shelters are. So it's very important to take that extra time to try and prepare. Now, whenever I do a talk throughout the state, the most knowledgeable people that I speak with are right here in Kauai, because most everyone has gone through an event. That was the other September 11. It was everyone always remembers what happened that day. Very strong storm that made a quick turn and surprisingly kept its strength, and of course blasted Kauai head on. And then what we have known, besides wind damage, there's also storm surge. And also in a hurricane, in this quadrant, in the upper quadrant where the storm is headed, it actually amplifies the storm in that area. And that's what we saw, increased amount of damage on that side of the eye wall, where the maximum gusts were exceeding 150 miles an hour. So of course, I don't need to show you guys the devastation. You guys probably remember it firsthand, but we like to show these photos throughout the state to try and encourage people to get ready. Individuals on the Big Island seem to think that they're not going to get hit because they have the volcanoes there and that they're going to deflect them. But the probability is higher overall over the long term that they're going to get hurt because they're closer to Hurricane Alley coming across the Pacific. So nobody is protected. It's just that Kauai has been unlucky. Not too far away from here, this home. I actually got to see this home later on. I didn't know that was the home, the famous home that was video recorded. I'd just like to play that. I don't have the audio going on here, but you can probably hear. Now the occupants were in the home. I don't know if you know who they are. They were there, and the neighbor, I don't know about you, but if I lived there and I heard this later, heard my neighbors laughing that my roof just blew off, I wouldn't be too comfortable. And that video is always there for everyone to see. Wind gusts up as high as 175 miles an hour. And that's really strong. That exceeds the building code that we use today. So the important thing is that if we build the code, we're better. Because in the old days, we didn't. And it wasn't that long ago, we just didn't use the clips and ties that we're going to talk about here shortly. When's the last time we seen Tree Tunnel Road looking like this? It was stripped pretty clean after Hurricane Iniki. So basically, you guys know the statistics, but just to remember, there were 7,000 people left homeless after Hurricane Iniki. 41% of the homes were damaged or destroyed, and that's very significant. So really, there was an assessment made by FEMA afterwards, and it said that successful performance resulted from a defined load path, continuous load path. And so 1992, in the building code and the practice in Hawaii was to put clips maybe on every other rafter. But there wasn't a continuous load path leading all the way down to the foundation. So we're kind of reactive in the things that we do, and so the code changed after Iniki. And also, the other thing that we're going to talk about is the failure of the glasswork. That would allow a significant amount of damage to the building, and we'll explain how that happens. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety has a research laboratory on the East Coast of the U.S. And what they do is they don't wait for the hurricanes. They actually have a building where they blast them with wind force, and they actually show the difference. And if I can get the video up and running here, between homes that have the clips and the load path in them and those that don't. The house on the left, obviously, did not have the load path in it, whereas the house on the right did. And it shows different angles. I hope they didn't destroy the camera. So it's great that we have these centers, and why is it important to the insurance industry? Because they're having to pay out so much when there is damage. And so we can do more in the laboratory now to improve our codes and the way we build, rather than waiting for a storm and then going back to investigate on how things happen. So that's significant. So the most important part, and the real difference between one house and the other, especially in new construction, is this continuous load path. And all that is just making sure that everything is connected all the way down to the foundation. And not only the roof ties, but if it's 2 stories, the floors are connected, and then it's anchored down into the foundation somehow, some way. And there are many ways of doing that. You know, one of the products that my company represents, this little H2.5, I think today it's like 45 cents out on the market. But this will hold up to 400 to 500 pounds per rafter. And that would make the big difference. If more of the homes in Kauai had these during the time of Hurricane Iniki, many of the roofs would not have come off. Our trend in the building code is to exceed that today. It's around 600 to 700. And so actually we don't sell many of this product anymore because our building code now in Hawaii is much stronger than it was before. So we're seeing bigger ties out there. So if you look at the overall market, for housing in Hawaii, the changes really came after Hurricane Iniki. So if you're looking at timeline, around 93 to 95, we started putting in this continuous load path. And so anything before that, if it hasn't been retrofit, is still vulnerable. And that would be many of our single wall homes, some double wall homes, depending on when they were built and what the builder put into them. So there's a great opportunity for retrofit. This particular carpenter is showing the practice of nailing down the rafters to the walls. And what we did up until pretty much 1995 in the state was toe nailing. And I always like to show this presentation a lot to realtors, and they have no idea about construction. So many of them think toenailing is this. So I have to show them a little bit of the difference, that toenailing is pretty much this, where a nail is going in on an angle, and that's probably the weakest part of the nail. You know, if you're really looking for how a nail works, you know, if you drive it in like that, and then the upward force of the wind coming along is pulling that nail out in this direction, that doesn't take much load to pull it out. Anyone who tried to pull a nail out with a hammer knows. But if you take that nail and you turn it around this way and you put more of them in, then the upward force is going this way, so it's trying to break the nail in half, and that takes much more resistance to do that. So now I've just given you the secret of Simpson strong tie. It's just a little clip that reorients the nails so that it has different, bigger uplift resistance force. So protection of a home versus how old the house is in Hawaii really is this. The least amount of protection would be no hurricane clips at all, or no continuous load path. In the 90s, after Hurricane Eva, we started putting clips in, but it wasn't on every rafter, and it was really light duty. And then, of course, after Iniki, we started stepping it up and putting that continuous load path all the way down to the foundation. And then, of course, now we're on modern building codes, and these codes require minimum resistance. Now, they don't want to make it too expensive for homes, so they evaluate the risk of a hurricane coming. So, for instance, for Hawaii, we wouldn't have as big a hurricane tie as they would in South Florida, for instance, because they get a hurricane almost every year, whereas on the average here, it's maybe 12, 15, right now over 20 years. So that's kind of the difference in the age of the home, and that's what we try and look at. Usually when someone comes up to me and talks about their house, I ask them when it was built, because that'll give you a clue as to what we did and how we built during those times. So now we're on the 2006 code. It's funny because this is 2017, but it takes a while for us to catch up. We are told that the state will be on the 2012 as well as the counties sometime this year, which is a good thing because modern codes are more up to date based on experience and testing. We also have other concerns in Hawaii because sometimes people live in valleys or close to the ocean where the wind accelerates based on the topography. So we have topography maps as well that we take a look at. So basically the simple roof to wall tie, if you look at the state per county, the date of the plans being 89, it would probably have for Kauai County some clips on there. May not be a lot, they may not be heavy duty, but there may be some. As far as the whole continuous load path for Kauai, date of plans 92. Now notice that year is significant because that was Hurricane Iniki. And also Kauai was the first county in the state to jump on and do the continuous load path based on some experience, I imagine. Topography, as I mentioned, is an issue. If you take a look at the island, there are contours on the island, and so the overall wind speed in the building code today currently that we're designing to is 105, but it may be accelerated if you're in a valley or in a topography where the wind tends to accelerate as it comes through the valley. So the wind code, it may be 105 here, but over here it might be 140. So it depends on the location. That's what the engineer does for new construction. This handbook is probably one of the most significant things I've seen come out in the state. It first started in Hawaii, and now it's grown to many, many other states and territories in the U.S. It's called the Homeowner's Handbook to Prepare for Natural Disasters. I know the author is a good friend of mine, Dennis Wong, and also his co-author, Darren Okamoto. They work with the Sea Grant program outreach at University of Hawaii, and it's affiliated with NOAA. And these guys put this workbook together, and it's already on its upcoming 4th edition later this year. They've just, in a real easy to read how-to book on what to do to prepare for natural hazard, of course one of them being hurricanes, and I'll touch on some of the stuff that's in this book, and I'll also let you know how to get a copy. Well, as they go through the book, of course, what you always hear at the beginning of hurricane season is to gather your emergency supplies and your evacuation kit. And then they always talk about planning, both for tsunami and hurricane, and know the difference between watch and warnings. And there's real simple tables in the book that show people how to deal with those. Also, adequate flood and hurricane insurance. Most people don't think of that until it's too late. I know I just sold my house and bought another one, and I never even met the insurance broker. The bank, the mortgage company set everything up, and they met their standards, but they're minimal standards. Does it even cover the belongings that I have in the home? It's very important for people to know what insurance they have and what is covered. The book goes into that. Last but not least is prepare your house. The continuous load path, or at least hurricane clips, window protection, looking at the trees and roof. The book goes into that. One of the things as I work as a territory manager with Simpson Strong Tie, I always get surprised, like last year when we had a storm coming, is to get a call the night before from a homeowner and asking how they can retrofit their home. And this is the night before the storm. And I said, you know what, forget about it. Go get your water and toilet paper, because you're trying to put the clips in right now, you're doing more harm than good. That's the thing that we should be doing this time of year before hurricane season comes. And it really doesn't take that long, but you can't do these things the night before. Most of us live in older homes. There's a huge housing stock in Hawaii that was built before 1995 that could be retrofit. And so retrofitting is a real topic that we do with an outreach program to get people to do more to protect themselves. Because number one, do they know where their emergency shelter is? And do they know if that shelter really is built to modern code, that it's going to withstand the storm? So sheltering in place is a big deal. This is a typical single family, or single wall, I should say. It's also single, it's probably multi-family, but single wall home. And it's easy to tell a single wall home. When I first came to Hawaii 20 years ago, I didn't know what single wall meant, but it didn't take long to see. Driving down the road, if you see the windows sticking out, it's a single wall, because the windows have nowhere to go. There's no wall cavity. So most of these homes have done well and survived some time, but they're very vulnerable to high wind. So what we did was try and find something. Many companies out there have a whole list of products in their catalog, but really none of them really worked on single wall homes. So we tried to find something that would work. On a single wall home, we have the typical tongue and groove board down here, redwood usually. And then you have the rafters coming out. And then you have in between the rafters a freeze board. And that complicates things, because on a home that you would find on the mainland, usually that freeze board would be flat and in line with a wall. But here usually it's perpendicular to the roof, so it's on an angle, and it's also sticking out away from the wall. So we had to try and design a clip that would reach around to grab the rafter to hold the roof down, and we had to do it in such a way that the nails wouldn't pull out. So we ended up putting all these embossments and bends in this particular clip with screws in them to be able to do the trick and still meet the Hawaii minimum load at the time when we designed this of 400 pounds of uplift. And we tried to also make it easy for the homeowner to install. So usually it's over some kind of fascia board. If not, they need to apply one, and they also needed to secure that. And through testing, we figured out that this would work. Now, we were really lucky because the author of this book actually did this to his in-laws' home. And he still was friends with his in-laws after he finished. So what he did is he came in, and it was actually strange because the rafters were already a different color. And he added these clips, you can see them here, to each one of the rafters. This was in Pearl City. It took him 3 Saturdays. It cost him $300 in materials and tools to be able to do this. If he had hired it done, the handyman or the contractor would have charged him approximately $2,000. So it really is not that expensive to at least hold the roof down, which is the most vulnerable part of the home. And so we're very fortunate that he actually went through that exercise. The other part on single wall homes, a lot of them are post and pier. And what we experienced when we had the earthquake on the Big Island was many of these homes came off their foundation or their tofu blocks. And when I go to the mainland and talk about this, they have no idea what I'm talking about with tofu blocks. And in fact, when the new building code kicks in, a lot of the engineers and the designers that are working, trying to make a continuous load path to come all the way down are more worried about this termite pan than the actual load path. But the termite pan provides a little piece of metal. Everybody knows a termite pan. You can see actually the red rust on this termite pan in the photo. So the termites can actually get through there anyway if they want to. So it's really not doing much good. That's what treated lumber is for, and that's what galvanized metal is for and stuff like that to keep the termites out of there. So really what's more important here is to keep a continuous load path to keep this building on its foundation. And that's one of the things that we've seen, especially after the earthquake on the Big Island, of how to complete the load path for post and pier foundations. So once again, the author of the book took his home. These are some of the documented views of some of the damages that happened on the Big Island. One of the most vulnerable was these kickers right here would come out because they're just toe-nailed in, so they would get separated. The 4x4 post would fall off the tofu block, or the wood would split at that location. So what the University of Hawaii, and this has got to be like the least advertised thing in the world, the University of Hawaii in Hilo actually came up with a program on their website which is called the Retrofit Expert System. And any homeowner could go on there if they had a home that's sitting on post and piers to be able to go in and based on where they're located in Hawaii, in the state, go through, and if they're not familiar with the terminology, it shows you what a joist is, what a brace, what a pier is, etc., and show them how to count them and type them into the program just by sheer number and how far apart they are. And then actually what this does when you get done is it generates a drawing which shows details on how to fortify that home. And usually what it involves is strengthening the pier and adding shear walls in the corners. And that helps them to be able to make it through the next earthquake. But the amazing part about fortifying a home for an earthquake, you're also doing the same thing for a hurricane. You're adding strength to that house. So this is one of the details that came out of this, was taking the post that's on the tofu block and then just kind of splicing on a 2x and putting an anchor down into the foundation and then adding strengthening to these kickers so that they don't blow apart during a storm. So a lot of these are in the book. The author of the book actually did this to his in-laws' home and fortified it. You can see there's a lot of different bracing and things that are done on the home in order to do that. And these are just some of the drawings, or some of the slides showing his work over a couple of Saturdays. And depending on where you are in the state, you don't have to do all of the piers. If you're on the Big Island, you have to do much more, of course, than you would in Kauai. So there's, we talked about hurricane for clips for the roof, and then you have the post and pier. Now, if I was going to pick one to do, I would definitely do the roof because that's the most vulnerable, the one that would potentially blow off. The weight of the home, unless you have a huge storm, is probably going to hold it down. But, if you get to the next level, you've done the roof, you want to do post and pier, then that would be the next step. The other thing to look at is what's growing around your home. If you have a tree that's in your around the house that's taller than your house, then your house is vulnerable for that tree falling. And you do not know which way the wind's going to blow. You think of the trade winds, but the hurricanes can come from any direction. So really the rule of thumb is the distance from the tree to the house should always be greater than the height of a full-grown tree. And I know it gets really expensive and trees grow really fast in Hawaii. I had 12 eucalyptus trees behind my house in Kaneohe, and they were over 100 feet tall, and they wanted $1,000 each for each one of those trees because that's dangerous work. But that's a lot of money to spend. But then again, it's better than sleeping on the other side of the house because you're worried the tree is going to fall down on this side. The other thing to do is in the construction of the home is the most vulnerable part is the eaves or the overhang. And that's what happened during Tropical Storm Iselle. There were about 60 homes on the south side of the Big Island that were affected all along the perimeter because those are the most vulnerable due to the uplift. So really what we do is make sure that it is properly nailed. If you're re-roofing or you have an opportunity to be up there to be able to secure that, those are very vulnerable areas of the home. Last but not least, we have flying debris. And flying debris is important. This picture was also taken in Kauai. Somebody mentioned that the windows are already blown out in one of the vehicles there. I didn't notice that before, but I'm not surprised with the stuff blowing around. What we have here with flying debris is internal pressurization, and it's mentioned in the building code. There's a great myth out there that when a hurricane comes, everyone should just open up all the windows and let the wind blow through the house. The problem with that is once it comes in, it's got to go somewhere. And one of the ways it would put more pressure on the roof, almost doubling the pressure, and blow the roof off faster. So there's a very concerned, and actually the building code today, the modern building code addresses protecting the openings from windborne debris. And that can be done many different ways. We have impact-resistant glass, shutters, pre-cut plywood, safe rooms. And each of them have their own benefits. But it's very dangerous. If you have a 2x4 flying through the air, I know Dade County, Florida has a picture in the building department of a coconut tree with a 2x4 sticking right through it. So when they get a certain velocity out there, it's very dangerous. I mean, we're protecting windows, but this is actually a door where a 2x came through. So it's a very dangerous situation. Window coverings, there's a lot out there. There's actually a company out on the floor that has windows with the plastic honeycomb panels. But what are the benefits to that? At the top of the list is the most expensive. NOAA's office at Manoa has the most expensive one out there because they're supposed to be the brains at the center of the storm. So they want protection. They actually have, you push a button and that would be nice to have in the home, just push a button. And the least expensive would be down here, would be plywood. But then also when you compare the time to deploy, this is the fastest, and of course takes more time to do. And if you have a 2-story home, plywood's not really advisable because you have to get up on the ladder and the wind's probably already blowing. So there are different ways of doing that. The author of the book actually did some pre-cut plywood, and he did it with storm panel screws. There's many different kinds out there in the market. This is a stainless steel one that they drive in and leave in place, where you take the wing nut off and the plywood later so it doesn't, because that's what takes the most time to deploy. So if the fasteners are already there, you just deploy them. And the pre-cut plywood, or in this case OSB, he had labeled and in his garage where he knew where they went. The trick is to keep the amount of time to a minimum because we don't have a lot of time when these storms turn. And this is just an example of one of the storm panel screws that he used that was stainless and it had a little plastic cover over there. Some people don't like this because it keeps sticking out of the wall, but they also make them that go in the other way. The other option, of course, is a safe room. And safe rooms are a little bit harder to build when you have an existing home, but if you have a new home, it may be an easier way to just have a safe room where you can go that will withstand the storm. Maybe other parts of the home would be damaged, but at least your family would be safe inside the room. And this is just an example of a display safe room. And really what it amounts to is just a heck of a lot more hardware and 2x and sheeting to withstand the storm, to be able to shelter in place. This is really hard to read, but this is a chart that they're working on in the state to help people to figure out the ability to shelter in place during a hurricane, whether they should stay home or whether they should leave. And so on this side, it just kind of shows if it's just single wall, double wall, concrete, hollow tile house, or a safe room. And this one shows whether it's possible to shelter, depending on the size of the storm, whether it's unsafe and advisable to go to an emergency shelter, or the best type of home to stay in. So they're trying to give more guidance to homeowners on what to do. And a lot of it depends on how hardened their home is. Insurance. Insurance is There's a lot of factors involved with insurance. Insurance can help you to actually fortify your home. There's a lot of considerations on which policy to use. On hurricane insurance, you've got to consider the wind-related damage, also the water damage when the wind creates a hole in the wall, and then you've got to think about it. The water damage is from the top down. So in other words, hurricane insurance doesn't cover flooding. That's covered by flood insurance. And the way they differentiate that is if the water came from the top down. Flood insurance, on the other hand, could be from tidal surge. And the way to think there is the water damage is coming from the ground up. And that's separate. And flood insurance is also much more expensive. The FEMA maps were recently changed, so a lot more people are having to have flood insurance. And if you don't get it, the bank, if you have a mortgage, they get it for you. And I went through that. Even though my house was up 100 feet in Kaneohe, there was a stream nearby, and it touched the corner of my lot. So I had to get a surveyor to come out and get an amendment letter to change that. Otherwise, I was getting hit with a $5,000 bill from the bank. So it's important, but sometimes you need it. So key things to consider for insurance: should look at the standard insurance versus the catastrophe insurance, and that also versus flood insurance, to figure out what your how much you need, what the replacement cost is versus the market value of the property. You have to consider inflation, increased cost of compliance, improvements, and surge demand. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very important because today many people, I feel, really don't even know who their insurance broker is. They're just paying the money, or the mortgage company's taking care of it, and they don't really know what is being covered. Just, because think about it, the mortgage company just worried about your structure, not the contents. So you always got to be thinking, are you protected? Can you get that covered? And then there's a waiting period. They're not going to be there with a check right after the storm. There's a long process and inspection and assessment, and it varies per hurricane and depending on how bad the hurricane was. The good news is that if you retrofit your home, you can get discounts on your hurricane insurance. If you just do the clips, like we talked about before, to tie the roof down, then you could get 10, 12, sometimes 15% discount on the insurance. Especially the local insurance companies here are very receptive to that. They want people to retrofit their homes. So you can imagine the beginning, after a while, these retrofits begin to pay for themselves. So over a few years, you would have saved that money. A lot of times, all they're looking for is the receipts or the photos of the work that you had done. They're not really requiring a lot of paperwork. They're not requiring licensed contractors. You can do it yourself. Single wall retrofits, they will also cover, many insurance companies will cover single wall retrofits, now that we have clips and other things out there that work on single wall homes. So that's also good news. You can go beyond that. If you go with a continuous load path, if you go all the way down to the foundation, like on the post and pier, there's also credits that different insurance, not all, but several of the insurance companies will have. And last but not least, they'll help you reduce your insurance premium if you have opening protection. They'll give you credits towards that as well. So there's a lot of benefits through your hurricane insurance to retrofit the home, not only for your life and safety, but really when it gets really all down to it, the bottom line is retrofitting your home or protecting yourself or getting ready for a wind event is all about your family. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do after the storm? And if you can shelter in place and be safe, that's the most important thing. So when we're thinking about getting ready for hurricane season and what work we've already done on our homes, I think if we just think about our family, that'll motivate us to get these things done in time for the next hurricane. And last but not least, the book that I talked about, there's a free electronic version available online. If you go to the University of Hawaii website and search on Homeowner's Handbook, it'll pop up. This URL is kind of long. But you could also Google University of Hawaii Sea Grant, the book will come up. And you can download that copy for free. If you want a printed copy, it's right now out of stock. They're getting ready to print the 4th edition. But once that happens, you can write and send there's a $5 shipping and handling fee to Sea Grant College program. many times when they're in print, when we do outreach programs like this, we have free copies available, but unfortunately, we're out of stock right now. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions or anything, I'll stay after to answer them.